Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face, my card making space. And another take on this little mini stamp set from Simon Says Stamp, the little Sunflower Dance set. I used this in a recent live stream and had stamped and heat embossed extras for later. Later is now. So this time I did some simple watercoloring with Distress Oxide inks. Love. I colored my own ribbon, splatter, all the things. So, as always, everything I used will be listed and linked in the description box below the video. My links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links and end up placing an order, I do get a little kickback from that at no extra cost to you. It helps keeps the lights on, pays the bills, enables me to keep bringing out content. And yeah, let's get into making this card. So like I said in the intro, I had stamped and heat embossed this little set onto Strathmore watercolor paper. And I'd stamped it with the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink and then heat embossed them with Wow Clear Matte Dull embossing powder. And at the very end of this video, I'll put a link to the live stream. They are quite long, especially when I, chat with everyone sometimes in them for an hour or two after all the making is done. But they're not for everybody. I get it. It's okay. That's why I do and will continue to do videos like this that are edited and a little more compact. So, for my watercoloring, Distress Oxides, I'm using the minis. I like having the minis. I had bought them specifically for things like this. For me, I always kind of joke, even though it's true, I need a bigger boat. I need more space. I love the minis because then I can have a bunch of colors in front of me without taking up a whole lot of space. So I am using for the petals, Wild Honey, Fired Brick, and Candied Apple. And I just smushed them onto my little plastic palette. Any non-porous surface will work. And then I'm using my little Tim Holtz water brush, same one I've been using for a million years. And when the brush was wet, I have a cloth off to the side to wipe like between colors, things like that. And I start with my latest, which is the Wild Honey. And I put the Wild Honey towards the tips of the petals. And then the Fired Brick gets put on at the base and kind of pulled up. And then I drop in a little bit of the Candied Apple. It's not as obvious on screen, but in real life, that little extra, pop of red just works. And this first little bit is just a smidge sped up. And then I'm going to super speed this up because it's just repetitive and simple. So here we go. Now I'm just super speedy. And yeah, it's just fun. And there's something about oxides. I will never tire of watercoloring with oxides. Just the way they work with water and blend and all the things. I love it. You could totally do this with just one color. When I used this set in the live stream, I was going on about how I wanted to do, those deeper red sort of shades for this little sunflower image. And that's what I followed through with because I love it. Sunflowers they really are just cheerful. So I painted all three of these images just doing the exact same thing. For the stem and leaves, I did just my go-to combo when it comes to specifically the Distress line and green. I twisted Citron and Rustic Wilderness. I just love those two greens together. There's something with like just the bright green of the Twisted Citron and blending it with the Rustic Wilderness. Just, I don't know. It hits the right spots. I love it. So I'm kind of doing the exact same thing. I put the light green towards the tips of the leaves and then the Rustic Wilderness towards the base. And then I'll use the Rustic Wilderness just right down the stem. And that's it. Just super simple. And because they're oxides and water reactive, the guesswork is just taken out of it, really, So I forgot to do the third one. I remember it when I do the flower centers. So flower centers were gathered twigs and ground espresso. Just easy. And then I remember to do the final stem on this one. And then for my little butterflies, I used dried marigold and then added some of that wild honey. And that's it. It's just really, really simple coloring. When I was done coloring, die cut them with the coordinating wafer dies. And I also die cut some white cardstock with this. This one's newer. CZ Design Nested Tags wafer die set. So I did my die cutting. I set those aside. And then I pulled out, this is some seam binding ribbon. I've shown this many times. It's been a while. It's another one of those things where I can't even remember the last time I showed it, but I've shown it several times. Tim Holtz has done like dedicated. He did a video. You'd have to search. He showed it with using the mica stain sprays. That's fun. That's fun because the mica stain, has the glitter in it too, like the shimmer. And that works great with this too. But I just used 2 distress spray stains. I used wild honey and fired brick. I did put on gloves for this. You don't have to. And a lot of times I don't. Your hands will be an inky mess, which doesn't really bother me. But this time I was like, how about we just put on gloves? Save myself the aggravation of having, orange hands for the next couple days. It all washes off, but sometimes it likes to seep into the cuticles, things like that. So all I did was I just sprayed the ribbon with a little bit of water and then sprayed the spray stains and smushed it up. And the thing I really like with this ribbon is like as it gets wet and if you crumple it like this on purpose, and then I used my heat tool to dry it faster to sort of set the ink. I don't know if I would still heat set it just to be on the safe side because the last thing I would want is to let it just air dry. And then if it's not fully dry or just like set, I would be concerned about the color potentially starting to leach out into the cardstock. So I just think heat setting just works. So I used my heat tool, heat set it, and I kept crumpling it up while I did that. And that's it. It's simple. And that'll work. It doesn't have to be like spray stains. You could use the inks and some water as well. It would just take a little bit longer because you'd have to be like pressing them, into it. But it works. So I'd set that aside. And I took this tag and I used that wild honey Oxide ink and I just smushed it on what I call my ink smushing sleeve. This is a little storage sleeve. And pressed the ink pad lightly onto it, sprayed it with a bit of water, and then pressed it onto this tag just to create that mottled sort of look. And then just let that dry. It just gives it its thing. And I'll say this now, disclaimer. The colors, at least on my screen, the colors you see in the video of like this wild honey, this and what I'm going to do for the background, I would say are a little more true. My photos, I've talked about this. One, my photos are just not the greatest. It's not my forte. But also, yellows. I love yellow. I love yellow shades. Filming them and especially taking photos of my cards that have an abundance of yellow on them. Man, they look neon. And my photos did. And I gave up. I gave up. So, all to say, it's a little more accurate in the actual filming because my overhead camera wasn't freaking out. Shockingly, it does a lot, as a lot of you are aware. But anyway, for the tag, I adhered the little reinforcer, which I just die cut from a scrap of brown cardstock, and then added my little crinkly ribbon, and then just tied it in a bow, kept it simple. And then for my card front, my card base is a top folding A2 white note card, so 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I used the Pepita background again, which I have used many times. Love it. I love it so much. So I just put the background face up onto my desk. I used the full-size Wild Honey Oxide ink. I could have used the mini, but I also have the large ones. Convenience. Anyway, I used my blending brush to apply the ink to the stamp. I've also shown this in various ways over the years. And this just gives a bit of a lighter amount of ink, especially with oxides. But also, I can do things like this where I'm just kind of moving the ink around onto the stamp. I'm not inking it up solid. I don't want it perfect. I just, I want some texture and the color and all the things. So just applied it with the brush. I'd put a piece of Post-it tape where the score line is on the card just so I don't get any ink past that, on the back of the card. And then press the card front into the pattern and then lift off. And there we go. And again, this is a little more accurate on my screen as I'm editing this anyway. Um, the photos, it'll be a jump scare at the end. It's just going to be like bright. Anyway, on the inside of my card, I pulled out an oldie but goodie favorite of mine. This is the extra talkative set. This came out eons ago, a few years ago. And I took one of the little sentiments from it and I stamped it onto the inside of the card with the ground espresso ink. And then I decided to use one of the sunflowers that I'd watercolored. I was going to just stamp one of them in like the wild honey shade, but instead decided to just adhere this one because I had 3 of them. Why not? So I adhered that to the inside of the card, and I also adhered some of the little butterflies as well. And that's going to finish off the inside, which, as always, or as happens often, could be its own little clean and simple card. I always say how I don't do clean and simple very often. You know, it's not really my thing, but quite often how I finish the insides of my cards is basically a clean and simple card front. So it works. Anyway, once I had those all adhered, I snipped off any little bits hanging off the edge. And then for my tag, I'm adhering it with some Big Mama foam tape. So it's just going to give it a little bit of dimension. And then I'm going to adhere my little sunflowers. And these I'm just going to adhere with liquid glue. And then once I've got those, I'm going to adhere a couple butterflies. And then I was only going to adhere the 2. And then I was like, wait a minute, I've got 2 sunflowers, 2 butterflies. Like, we need odd numbers here. So I end up adding the 3rd little butterfly. I'm going to tuck him in later onto one of the sunflowers. So snipped off the bottom of that little stem there just to keep it like in line with the tag. And then here are my little butterflies. And then I'm going to add some splatter just to add that little extra something something. So for my splatter, I'm going to put this into my splat box. And then I'm going to use the ground espresso oxide ink. I'm going to smush that onto my palette. And then I'm going to add a bit of gouache to this and mix that all together with a little bit of water. So it's just going to tint the gouache to a bit of a brown shade. And then once I've got everything like really good and mixed, get it the consistency I want, make sure there's no like streaks of white in there, then I can splatter this. And I just use my fan brush to do all of this. And then I add my splatter. And as usual, I, start out a little bit light-handed. Could have stopped there. That's what I had meant to do. And then I can't stop. I can't stop once I start. So added a good amount of splatter to this. Let all of that dry. And for my sentiment, or like sentiment on the front, I'm using the little CZ Design mini set, the small thanks mini set. And I just took one of the thanks words, and I am going to white heat emboss this onto that same brown cardstock that I just cut the little reinforcer for the tag from. So I'd use my anti-static powder tool, stamped sentiment with clear embossing ink, covered it with Simon's Detail White embossing powder, melt with my heat tool, and then let that cool off for just a few seconds. Doesn't take long. And I just use my little microfiber cloth to buff away all that excess anti-static powder. And I can die cut this with the coordinating wafer die. And I also die cut another piece so I can layer these together, give that sentiment just a smidge of extra dimension. And see, I added that 3rd little butterfly. He's just fluttering around the little sunflower there. So I'm going to adhere my sentiment. And then I'm going to add one of the Trinity Stamps coffee bean heart sprinkles. I was going to add more, like, do a cluster, do 5 of them roughly, what I normally do with embellishments. And then I just stopped myself and I was like, 1 is good. Just one little heart. So I adhered that into place. And then I grabbed my white gel pen and I used that to add just some little dots and highlights to these images. Because I had been thinking about also doing white splatter and just didn't. And then as I got like to the end, I was like, it needs a little something. So yeah, just little random lines here and there, little dots here and there with the gel pen, just to give it that little extra something. And once this is done, this card is complete. So yeah, on screen, the yellow, and especially if you're familiar with the wild honey shade, it's not super bright. It's just a really nice, pretty yellowy orange sort of color. And yeah, on my screen, I would say this is very accurate. And then my photos were just like, whoa, what's with the neon? I don't know, y'all. It is just a struggle for me. But still, the little sunflowers are cute. And the Pepita background, love it. Obsessed with it. The colors, still fun. My camera, I don't know. It's just there. So that was my card. That was my video. I appreciate all of you, and I'll see you very soon in the next one. Bye. Thank you so much to my amazing Patreon supporters. For anyone that might be interested in joining my Patreon community and supporting me, the link to my Patreon is in the description box below the video. For everyone else, as always, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't, I'd love to have you. And here's a couple other videos for you to check out in case you missed them. Bye!